Hello, this is Silas. I'm here with my friend Steven again. We're back for our series of conversations. Say what's up to everyone.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you again.
We're going to be reading, or we're going to be having a conversation. This is part of a conversation series. Doing this like, here's the first one that I had. But we just finished, I finished posting the last conversation series we had in critical theory, massive 2.5 hour long conversation on that one. But this is the eighth recording or ninth recording that we have, focusing on Cracks in the Ivory Tower, The Moral Mess of Higher Education by Jason Brennan and Philip Magnus. And can you tell us a bit about why we're reading this book?
Sure. So this book explores the various ethical issues in higher education. Again, as I keep saying, it's not a question of ideology, although we're happy to criticize that, but it's more about issues that a lot of people tend not to think of, as far as funding, as far as people being trained, but people being trained for jobs that aren't available, people being made false promises, professors lobbying to secure their own status, even if it comes at the expense of students, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So with this one, it's part of the multiple series that I've done with Stephen where we're trying to get some better understanding of things. One of the things that I have realized from my life, different things, and part of the main thing on my channel for making this content for this time, is problems occur not because of what X is, but because of how we define X. So when it comes to something like education, I don't think you can find too many people that are really against education. There will be certain people who maintain certain structures and power systems where they won't want people to be educated on what's going on, lest they gain power and not need those systems that those people are benefiting off of. But that's a vast minority of people. And when it comes to education, I think a lot of the people who are detractors of the current systems, some of the people, a significant number of them, will characterize them as these are evil people. And then a lot of the people who are in defense of it will say, you are against this, characterize the other people out of them, caricaturize the other people out to them and say, you are against education. You want kids to be dumb. You don't want people to have freedom. But no, what we've realized from having conversations with ourselves and having conversations with other people and having our minds changed by gaining new information about things and understanding what things mean is that we want to do some of these similar things, but we end up doing and achieve them in ways. With these conversation series, part of it is trying to get that understanding. We started with Stephen. The first one series we did was back in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, or 2018, was we are what you consume, and we're focusing on food, the proteins, fats, and the carbohydrates that actually make your physical body, and also the ideas and thoughts, because we're more than just our physical. And with that, we've continued this series, and I'm just thankful for Stephen for taking his time to actually have these conversation series with me. And in some of these, we read some content, he reads some content, and then he leads the content or I lead the content. And in this one, he's been reading this book, and we've broken it up to different chapters. And I'm going to read you the chapters right now. And my suggestion is, if you haven't listened to any of the other ones, at least listen to the one we have about what was it again? The 7 big economic insights.
Yep.
And normative business ethics questions and the descriptive business ethics questions, right?
Yep.
And those are what the authors have decided they're focusing on, how they're actually, the lens that they're using to actually tackle the education system. And it's also what we're kind of using to talk about certain topics in here that really understand these points. Might sound combative or we're ignoring certain parts, but this is the main focus that we're using, and we think they're useful not just for this book, but just life in general. Anything else before I read the content?
No, I was just going to say, well, it's funny, too. One of the sources that we bring up is actually called The Case Against Education by Brian Kaplan. But obviously that's meant to be a provocative title. And he himself is an academic who spent his whole career in academia. I even started looking into that book, and he even says, I'm an Ivory Tower academic. But he picked that title. But he picked that title because he just wanted to be provocative. So he's not arguing against learning or even against academia as a whole. He's criticizing the current, as are these authors, they're criticizing the current system, how it operates, which there's definitely a lot of evidence for.
Yeah. And the content should stand on its own, but for what it matters, Jason Brennan and Philip Magnus both have also been in academia. I think I don't know if they still are, in
So
academia, but they have them.
yeah, so Jason Brennan teaches at the McDonough Business School at Georgetown, and then Magnus works at AIER, the American Institute for Economic Research. They don't like to identify as a think tank. They like to say we're a research center, but it basically, yeah, but it basically is that. So you could I mean, I guess you could argue that's academia. I know. I mean, he's doing academic work, I would say.
Yeah, and that's part of the point that we're trying to make here. The structure of this being in academia, being in this industrial kind of schooling system, is something that's relatively new, and still less than 1% of the world actually has gone through these kind of systems. So to think that that's the only way to have people learn things, the only way to have education, the only way to have human advancement is a fallacy. That is the experiment. These other ways of learning are the actual ways that we've actually been learning. And to think that this current system that's been around for roughly how many hundred? This is actually kind of the Prussian system, but we talked about this before. I forgot an exact date when university started.
The Prussian system started early 19th century. It was brought here to the U.S. I want to say late 1830s by Horace Mann in Massachusetts. But then the university system is modeled off of the medieval system in Bologna, Italy, in 1088. So that's almost 1,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've had this system, but we've been able to learn things. And yes, I'm not saying we were learning so many things in the past before this time, but that was not so much due to the education systems, but due to the technology and things like that we have now that have come through things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs being carried forward through other kinds of advancements of people cohabitating in better ways. And there's many things towards this. It is not purely just education. It's not purely just school. It's not purely just having degrees. And we're recording this on the day of the United States election, where you have this thing where people are like, oh, the more educated people vote this way. And yet that same group also has a demographic where they point at some of the least educated people and say, oh, look at kids. Kids are voting this way. But it's like, we also understand that we don't want people who are 12 voting on certain things because we understand they're not really that informed on certain things. But on the inverse, you also wouldn't go find an 80-year-old from another country and expect them to know about what's happening in your country more than a 12-year-old. So that's just showing that there's different ways of accumulating information that is productive to whichever cause and thing that you're focusing on. So that's the key that we're talking about. Education in the sense as I have been educated into doing something productive in this certain area and field that works best. That's the thing that we are for here, not necessarily just the education system. Now we're asking, is this system, the structure that we have right there, the higher education in the United States of America, the 9,500 or so schools, is that the best system? Is that a system that the rest of the world needs to adopt and copy in order to achieve some of the things that the United States of America has done? Those are the questions I think are being asked in this book and in this conversation series that I've been having with Stephen.
Yeah.
Okay, so the table of contents here, it's number 1 was neither gremlins nor poltergeists. Number 2, what do academics really want? Number 3, why most academic advertising is immoral bullshit. Number 4, on reading entrails and student evaluations. Number 5, grades, communication breakdown. Number 6, when moral language is a cover for self-interests. Number 7, the general education hustle. Number 8, why universities produce too many PhDs. Number 9, cheaters everywhere. Number 10, 3 big myths about what's plaguing higher education. Number 11, answering taxpayers. And as I mentioned, there's also a separate one with the 7 big economic insights, and then normative business ethics questions and the descriptive business ethics questions that you can check out. And now I'm going to kick it to Stephen to lead us off in this chapter for today, which is number 8, why universities produce too many PhDs.
Sure. So for those who may not have seen the last chapter was the Gen Ed hustle, and we talked about how a lot of people who can't find jobs teaching their PhD, teaching classes relevant to their PhDs, they sort of get pushed into general education. This is sort of the other side of that, of why are all these PhDs produced in the first place? So let's get in. So they open up with a statement about how someone laments how the humanities are dying. They're not appreciated. Humanity professors don't find satisfying employment, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to read it off, but you've probably heard similar things. There is a glut of underemployed PhDs, especially in English, modern languages, and the humanities. So this often gets blamed on a drop in demand or alleged budget cuts to higher education. So even if this narrative were true, we'd have to ask these questions. Do graduate programs then have an obligation to stop producing so many new PhDs? And why do so many programs continue to do so despite it being known that the jobs aren't there? So what's interesting is when the authors started this book, they actually believed the original story that, yes, humanities are dying. Yes, there's a decreased demand, all that. But as they started looking into it, they found that it didn't hold up. So even as student demand for instruction in the humanities declines, the number of new jobs for humanities professors either keeps pace with the general growth of the academic population or even grows faster than other academic populations. So remember from the last discussion, we talked about how English departments are much larger than other departments, and they're still growing at a faster rate, but they're still producing too many PhDs relative to how many jobs are available. So the reason the humanities glut exists isn't because the jobs are going away. It's because over the last few decades, they started producing PhDs at a rate too fast to be absorbed by academia. So the humanities aren't victims. They're essentially responsible for their own plight. And so we'll ask the question, if the jobs aren't available and the universities know it, do graduate programs have an ethical obligation to stop producing so many? The authors would argue yes, and so would I. And I think of what Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs says about it says it's a clip that's gone around, but something like, we're lending students money that we don't have, that they can't pay back, to train them for jobs that we know don't exist. It's like how did all this come about? But I would also point out here that part of this is that the administration and some of the teachers there have selfish reasons for doing so, which I'll get into. Any thoughts or comments before I continue?
Yeah, just the way we use language informs how we approach so many things. Again, not because of what X is, because of how we define X. As you pointed out, it's a simple thing where they are a certain demand, or there's certain room for certain things to be done, where if you if you have that, what is actually deciding why people are taking these things? Why aren't people better prepared to understand that, hey, if you take this, it's not going to operate? Because if I took a PhD in how to run a plantation and get the best slaves from Africa to run a plantation that picks cotton by hand in the United States of America, if I had a PhD in that and all of a sudden I graduated and I was working at McDonald's, would I really be called underemployed? Or would I be called overeducated, like mal-educated, where somebody would just come up and ask me, why did you possibly look at the world the way it exists today and think it would be useful to learn how to be a really excellent slave owner running a plantation in the United States of America, where that stuff's been illegal for so long? There's so many better ways to accomplish these things. So that whole idea where it's, oh, because I want to do this, because I spent all this time learning this, I am owed a job. That's not there. I don't think. I think we need to rethink how often the term underemployed is used. Just because you can do certain things better does not necessarily mean that's the key thing you're supposed to do. Like, technically, the best thing I might be able to do might be to animate some random story about my own life. But if that has no actual use outside of being entertaining to me, then possibly just being somebody just drawing frames in something in a bigger animation that tells a story that speaks to millions of people would be more productive of my time. So would I be underemployed because I'm not writing my own script, creating my own characters, doing my own animation frame by frame, if I'm just rigging one character in a grander story? No. When it comes to that market that's saying this is the price calculation that's going on, this is the value of what you're doing, how productive are you spending your time, then I'm technically not underemployed in that sense. So that's just something I think is key to think about when we use that term.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this in a previous discussion, but this is the point I always bring up about actors. Like, I know all these actors who complained, like, oh, I went to school for acting. I don't want to work in restaurants. This is beneath me. But how much demand is there for what you're doing? There's not a lead Hollywood role waiting for every single actor. I mean, DiCaprio gets paid like $25 million a movie or to star in or something, but it's like there isn't a role like that waiting for each one of these graduates. It's like some, if they're lucky, may get that role. And it was funny too. I remember having a similar conversation when I was at CIA Culinary Institute of America with one of my friends. When people asked me, they're like, "Oh, you're gonna have your own show someday?" And my friend was like, "There are millions of people in this industry. How many have their own cooking show? Like 10?" It's like, it's not impossible, but it's like, don't go to school thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna be the next big Food Network star." It's like your odds of getting that. It's like one in how many millions. Yeah.
That is one thing that there's a lot of positive things I see about the United States of America, but I've told Americans, told other people that you need to wake up from this American dream. You need to focus more on the American reality, and the American reality to me is much grander than the American dream. Just the different ways of the distribution of what's this, I just I've just listened to the Human Action book. I keep forgetting the actual terms. The distribution of where it's like, I'm good at this, I'm not as good as this as you are, so you can do this.
Ability distribution, division of labor. Are you talking about division of
Division
labor?
There we go. It's another D thing. Yeah. Okay, the division of labor. That aspect, that they're creating somewhere where you can actually do that. It has created such an excellent society, such an excellent culture with so much more capability to grow, that you have that kind of situation, and we need to focus on that. That's what needs to be focused, and not this American dream where it's like, oh, you can be anything you want to be. It's like, no, you can't. I'm never going to be a basketball star. Like, even if it wasn't just my age, just my height, I have certain limitations. It's just not going to happen for me. You don't have to tell every child they can be anything they can. You can say, look, you can try many things, and there's very few limitations if you find something that you think you can do to do it to a higher level. But doesn't mean if just because you like something means you actually can do that thing. Save that kind of thing for like Halloween and when people can dress up, but don't be like you're literally going to be able to be Superman, because that's not for everyone. But a lot of people come through this education system, come through just the culture in the United States of America, and imagine everything has to be exactly like that. But my whole life, my parents told me I can be anything. So why can't I be an English major that earns $200,000 a year? Like, why do I have to? I was told I can be anything. No, wake up from that dream to the actual reality of what's going on.
Well, I explained to someone too this division of labor in restaurants. Like, this busser kept complaining, "I want more money, I want more money," and we encourage him. We're like, "You should try and get a promotion or get another job elsewhere." And he's like, "No, I don't want the work." And I'm like, "Dude, you're only going to make so much money as a busser. Like, you're filling a role that other people don't want to do, so it frees those other people up to do other things." Like, as a manager, I've taken orders, I've bussed tables, I don't mind doing that stuff, but it's like, ideally those people are doing that job, and then it frees people to do other things. Like, a star chef is not going to peel carrots. It's like, he's going to design menus, design the menu, run the line, all that, the things that mainly drive the business. Those people are there to support him. There's a reason he's getting paid more money. It's the same thing with my example just now about DiCaprio. Like, they cast him in a movie. Okay, how many millions of people come out to see him? But that's how they make all that money back, and then that can pay everyone else. But it's like, but he's not going to string up his own lights, set up his own sound. Like, it's not worth his time and money. It's, you have other people do that, then they can focus on him, and then he drives the whole thing. So
underemployed, I think it's you can look at that within the field. Whereas if, for example, in a film, if you had a film and then you hired Leonardo DiCaprio just to be an extra in the background that hardly says a word, that would be an underemployment of what Leonardo DiCaprio can bring to a movie. But saying just because somebody has taken the same classes that Leonardo DiCaprio has done for the same amount of time, and then they're new to Hollywood, and then they are that bit part actor in the background, the extra. That's not underemployment, even though that person might say they're underemployed because they're not making a living off of being an actor. There's many other factors that go into your actual optimum employment.
Right. Yeah. All right. So moving on, the origins of the PhD humanities glut. So in 2015, over 55,000 students received a doctorate of some form from the 432 institutions issuing advanced degrees, because we keep talking about 9,500 or so colleges, but only certain ones will administer PhDs, and only some of them do PhDs in certain things. Megan Murphy, for example, she brought up how she went to one of the only schools that offers a PhD in gender studies. It's like, it's a very few. So she's like, if someone says, "Oh, I have a PhD in this," it's like, well, you only went to a handful of schools, and they're the only ones who offer it. So studies. So roughly roughly 7,400 of these students have postgraduate commitments in academia. That's the 55,000 out of the 55,000, and 9,800 said they would pursue postdoctoral studies. So you think about it, as I mentioned in the last section, economists with PhDs will often go work for businesses, go work for administration somewhere, work in NGOs, all that, depending on what you want to do. But of course, if you teach English, humanities, or something, you're probably most likely going to work in academia. So most new PhDs in humanities indicate, of course, they want to work in academia. As we have discussed, economics and English have vastly different job prospects. These sorts of patterns show in other fields too. So again, in the case of humanities, the jobs are being created. So the issue isn't the job shortage, but it's too many PhDs relative to the positions. The humanities have grown at a faster rate than the STEM fields, social sciences, or faster than almost any other category except for healthcare. Healthcare, of course, in recent times, because I mean, oh, but we can talk about the issues with Obamacare, but in general, there's healthcare is a lot more involved than it used to be. There are a lot more specialists now, and then of course you need a lot more nurses and other things. So those jobs are being created pretty fast. So again, it's still not enough to accommodate all these PhDs, though. Humanities and English have far less employment diversity than almost any other field. In the humanities, about 80% win in academia, whereas with English and foreign languages, 87% win in academia. It's 60% in the social sciences, so that would include psychology and things like that, and 46% in the life sciences, so biology, things like that, and then 32% in math and computer sciences, and 14% in engineering. So if you think about in some of those other fields, PhD in psychology, you may start your own practice or something. If you have computer sciences, you'll open your own firm. Math, of course, you could work for different businesses. Engineering, you become an engineer, all that. So add on top of this that the rate of PhDs being issued shows no signs of decreasing. Of course, humanities grads complain that the job market is due to budget cuts or devaluing of their subjects, but the numbers don't bear that out. One estimate actually showed that state level spending increased 20% between 2013 and 2018. So another narrative is the declining investment in education. So now, when you measure it by direct appropriations per pupil, public investments are down 8% since 1992, although the total inflation adjusted amount also rose 17% in this period, indicating enrollment growth simply outpaced federal and state appropriation growth. So the money per student in some places may have gone down officially, but in terms of the inflation has offset that, plus number of new students in total has increased by a lot. So it's not like they're short on cash. And remember that public tuition supports include direct grants, federally sponsored loans, and things like that. Need-based federal Pell Grant expenditures tripled over the same period, while federally subsidized lending increased almost fivefold. And the effects of these are hard to measure because, of course, they don't function in the same way typical spending does. Like, it's not like, okay, I can say how many dollars in sales did my job do this month versus that month, where it's people come in and spend the money directly and we know. Whereas with this, there's all this stuff moving around as, okay, this person got a scholarship, which was paid for by these people. They borrowed money from this bank. They borrowed money that was federally guaranteed, all this. So like, it's very hard to keep track exactly where the money came from, where it's spent, all that. And as we talked about in a previous chapter, some people point to the adjunctification, but this doesn't hold up. The faculty to student ratio has stayed roughly the same, and adjuncts are only a small portion of the humanities workforce. So sometimes we hear stories about how certain majors are targeted for elimination. Undergraduate majors are occasionally eliminated, which usually gets the staff to going to teaching general education, as we talked about in the last chapter. But the elimination of graduate programs is rare. So, for example, in 2018, the University of Akron phased out 10 of its existing PhD programs. All but 10 were in highly specialized fields, and all 10 were suffering from declining enrollments. On average, these programs graduated about 20 students a year. So you figure so few people graduating, it's like, yeah, of course we're going to end it because it's not worth paying a teacher, setting up a whole department, all that. So, but this is an exception. Most schools are adding PhD programs faster than they're eliminating them, except for a slight drop in political science programs between 2007 and 2009. The number of PhD programs is stable or rising. In fact, English and history are showing the most upward trajectories. In fact, there are roughly 15 to 25% more operational PhD programs than there were just before the financial crisis. So some were eliminated, sure, but the growth vastly exceeds the loss. So even though there were all these jobs wiped out in 2008, the number of PhD programs is still increasing by a lot. So they're not being starved for funding. And So then it's, why do these programs produce too many PhDs, which we'll get into in a sec. Before we do, did you have any comments, thoughts?
Yeah, you said the next section is going to be what?
It's going to be the bad incentives of the PhD programs, and we're going to go through students, faculty, administrators.
Yeah, then I can probably say this. This might come up later. For those of you who are, this is your first time listening to this series, with some of these, when Stephen's read the book, and we don't really go ahead of time and discuss the actual content. I haven't read any of the book, and Stephen's just leading me through. So sometimes I'll comment on something, and it's actually in the book. It's in Stephen's notes or something later. So excuse us for that. But just some interest that I had while he was speaking and just thinking about this topic is, I was wondering, okay, when was the first doctorate degree granted? And I checked here from worldwidelearn.com. So the first doctorate degree was granted in Paris in the 12th century. In its earliest years, the primary subject areas for doctorates included theology, law, and medicine. Yale conferred the first doctorate in America in 1861, followed by Harvard soon after. So yeah, that was the major field of study of that was public health.
Okay.
And oddly enough, I was reading in Human Action, which is the next conversation we have, they were talking about how doctors used to be very maligned. People used to talk about how it's like the carpenter is actually maintaining the life of the doctor, and the doctor isn't really giving a service because there wasn't any actual goods involved in it. It was more like maintenance. So they were thinking about it that way. But yet now, on average, I think the doctors are considered a lot more worthwhile than like the carpenter. And that's just looking at the way different jobs and different things are looked at. Where in the past, a doctor was not that thing where people would be like, oh, you're marrying a doctor. That's amazing. In the past, it was like, you're marrying a doctor. Why don't you marry the carpenter?
But it sort of adds on to what I said, too, about healthcare expanding a lot. I mean, think about now plastic surgery. They make a ton of money. So it's like if you're a plastic surgeon, you're considered very prestigious and all that. But back then, I think plastic surgery, I was reading, started in World War I as a way to deal with like the injuries caused. So it wasn't, there wasn't, we're going to restructure your nose and facelift and all this crazy stuff they do now. I mean, that wasn't even conceived of yet.
Things seem to get a lot more profitable once you involve the female of the species. they seem to drive a lot more of consumption and things like that. And if you actually look at the economy, the breakdown, it's about 80% on average of developed countries. The spending is driven by women in one way or another, whether it's men buying stuff to impress women or men buying stuff for women or women just themselves purchasing things for themselves. They have a majority of the control. And then I also checked to see how many PhD programs are in the United States of America. And here it says from Find a PhD, only around 1,500 of USA's 4,500 or so universities award doctoral degrees, but there's still quite a lot of options to make sense of. And that the PhD length on average is 4 to 6 years. International students in the United States of America is 984,898. So that's a lot of students.
Yeah.
It's a lot of extra people in the United States of America. So when you hear this coming up in voting, that's a lot of people. And I would say maybe, especially when it comes to PhD students, at least 50% of them tend to stay in the United States of America after that. So imagine every year, if you have this maintaining around this number, you're getting 500,000 more people into the country. And there you have people dying, you have people going out, you have people leaving the United States. But so that's a massive chunk. So that's part of why some people are concerned. Like, why is the United States of America bringing in so many people from abroad? Do we not have Americans who are able to fill these classes? But on the inverse as well, they talk about the brain drain type of things. Are some Americans, shouldn't you actually maybe be positive about this, where some of the smartest people, most capable people, in this case, it's not the whole like, oh, these immigrants are coming in and they're sending us doctors who are sneaking over the border. It's like, no, this is literally rather intelligent people coming in for PhDs and deciding we'll stay in the United States of America. And that's what I'm talking about, the American reality. Forget the dream or the nightmare. Try to focus on what's the reality happening in there. Are you actually draining talent and ability from the rest of the world? Or if that person stayed in that country, they don't have the university there. So would they be able to actually learn that? Wouldn't they actually be undereducated in that sense? Forget, they might be overemployed because they might be doing something that they could do a lot better if they actually had achieved some better education. So that could be something to consider in that as well. And then also I checked, as we mentioned, there's 9,500 schools we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. And that's because we're talking about colleges and universities. And what is the difference between a college and a university? College is often smaller institutions that emphasize undergraduate education in a broad range of academic areas, whereas universities are typically larger institutions that offer a variety of both undergraduate and graduate degree programs. And that's why you'll have that discrepancy on it. But as Stephen pointed out, there's going to be certain fields where, yes, there might be 4,500, but some of these 4,500 might be like, oh, we have a PhD in English. That might be something that's in most colleges. But then if you want a PhD in gender studies, as you mentioned, it might be a handful of colleges that you'd actually be able to go to for that. So that's something to consider. And I tried checking, and I don't think they have this, but if they have any institutions that only do PhDs, that do nothing else but PhDs, I haven't found that yet. But
no, I didn't see anything.
I understand why they aren't. If anybody else there, or Stephen, or anyone knows why that isn't a thing where you could have an institution that focuses strictly on PhDs.
Well, because I was going to say, too, that was where part of the grievance studies hoax started to unravel, because it turns out I made an error in the previous video. I thought Helen was Helen Wilson, but that was actually the name that James Lindsay went by. And he said, I had a PhD in gender studies. And Megan Murphy at the time, she's like, wait a minute, only a few schools offer that. I'm one of them. And then the one of the people who he was speaking to, they said, let's talk on the phone. And then they heard his voice. They're like, wait, are you trans? It's like, it's like, oh no, it's a guy faking his identity. And he's like, I could have made up a whole identity and everything, but he's like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. So some of those things, it gets to the point where it's like, how much can you actually go into these things? And those are some of the things that I think of. It just shows how good people are. This might be how lazy people are, but it just seems like it would be rather easy to run certain scams on people, but people just don't have the energy or the ill will to actually scam people to the extent that it seems able to actually do with people. But then, hey, we have these elections once in a while where maybe I'm wrong and maybe people actually are a lot easier to be scammed. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, this is sort of an anecdote, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but that guy from Harvard who I talked about in the previous videos, one of my favorite moments with him was one of our coworkers prank called him. Like, he sat in another part of the building and called the kitchen phone. He pretended to be a higher up from within the company, and it was offering him employment at another facility that the company owned. And he actually got the guy to believe him. And he actually got the guy. He's like, oh, come meet me at this restaurant on Saturday at 8:00 and we'll discuss it. And the guy actually went to the restaurant and all that. And he went to the restaurant, it was closed, and then he left him a voicemail like, you got punked. So,
oh no. Yeah, I mean,
someone's like, I feel bad. I'm like, he didn't get hurt or anything. Like, if he had gotten scammed or hurt or something, I would have felt bad. But like, I guess he just went there and he's like, wait, what's going on? And then he realized it was just our coworker faking like a whole thing on the phone with him.
Oh no. And that happens though. You see that in relationships. You see that where someone's like, oh, I can't believe this person was this way. And I'm like, why didn't you confirm if that wasn't the person? Like, some of them we're talking about when they're actual dating and the trans thing with James Lindsay. Sometimes someone would be like, I can't believe, those are the ones that are weird to me. It's like, I can't tell. I guess with some of them, some people can be passing. So maybe you won't be able to tell that a trans person's actually a guy. But when that happens, like, how passing are the people? I don't know. Yeah, actually, I've seen some people who pass pretty well. But then it just seems like it could have come up.
Yeah.
Something would have come up. And then how do you, as a trans person, get to somebody and be like, when I told them I was trans, all of a sudden I'm surprised. Like, there weren't things about them that you could tell before that they might not be okay with that. Like, when you actually told them, like, it seems, maybe I'm misjudging how much people look into it. And maybe that's why we're having that's part of why we're having this conversation series, to get to how do people define this is what actually something actually is. I'm actually educated. I've actually learned the information about this thing to the point where I'm confident that I'm able to productively or to be accurate in my estimation or understanding of what is actually going on. Maybe that is a lot lower than I've thought.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right, so next section is the bad incentives of graduate programs. We're gonna sort of do what we did in the earlier chapter as far as breaking it down by students, teachers, and administration, sort of contrasting their incentives. So as far as the students go, usually these are people that show lots of potential and are often willing to forego certain opportunities in the private sector in order to pursue specialized expertise in a given field. That's the thing. I mean, a PhD isn't supposed to be some general knowledge thing. This is a person who delves deep into a particular subject and really specializes in it. So many students love studying the field itself, but they do it for career opportunities, usually a professorship. So again, it seems to be common knowledge that the job opportunities in the humanities are lousy. Even the regular newspapers outside of academia talk about it, but there don't seem to be any studies on whether students know this going in. So do students know how bad it is? If they do know, do they just think they'll beat the odds somehow? Are these are these students way above average intelligence and with strong analytical skills somehow bamboozled into pursuing a PhD? There's no clear answer here, but it makes you wonder. And I think back to what Tom Woods was saying about his own instructor at Columbia, was saying, guys, I don't know why you're here. The jobs aren't available. You'll have a Columbia PhD on your resume. That'll look great, but good luck finding a job. And then he talks about competing with 400 other people for one job. And that's a guy who came out of Harvard and Columbia. So if you have one from a lesser known university, your odds are even worse. So, yeah. However, it's been found that PhDs who don't end up in academia find employment elsewhere. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2015, the rate of unemployment for PhD holders was actually only 1.7%. So a lot of PhDs do find work overall, just a lot of it's outside of academia. So the ones who can't work as professors end up in high school, usually teaching, and then they'll administration later on. They end up in non-NGOs, non-government organizations, I think. They end up, of course, in the government itself or in some kind of private business. Again, if you have a PhD in economics, you might be like an advisor or investor or something. And although many don't work as professors, they usually still end up pretty well. Again, James Lindsay has the degrees in physics and math. I think he runs a business with his wife or something. I guess he does well. Still not 100% sure what he does for a living, but I mean, he's not starving, so he's all right. And let's see here. So another factor is that students get paid to get their PhD. So the typical PhD student gets a stipend of $50,000 to $30,000 a year. So this reduces the opportunity cost of a PhD program. So you might get paid initially to work more in the private sector if you have, like, let's say a master's, but if you get a PhD, you could end up making more long run. I mean, obviously more time in school, harder work, but long run, it could be a lot better. Sometimes this may be an unconditional fellowship grant. Sometimes it comes with a condition that the student teaches or works as a research assistant 15 to 20 hours a week. Now, when Jason was a teaching assistant, he only averaged about 3 hours a week in class, 3 hours a week tutoring, grading, and preparing. So they explain that 15 to 20 hours is the upper end. Usually it's a lot less than that. If you manage your time well, you're barely doing it at all. But that's sort of the agreement of, like, we'll help train you for your PhD. We'll give you the stipend, but you have to do some active teaching work. And at the same time, some graduates pay out of pocket or take on debt to pursue their degrees. Unfortunately, the trend seems to be that the students with the weakest job prospects are most likely to pay out of pocket or assume debt. So in STEM, for example, fewer than 5% of PhD grads are paying out of pocket, whereas with the social sciences, it's almost 25%. So the thought there, I think, is because STEM is in high demand, the universities don't mind paying a little bit of money for those people, because then that creates more valuable workers and that makes the university look better and that'll lead to other things. Whereas with the humanities, it's more, okay, we have these people with PhDs that there aren't as many jobs for. So if you want to study that, you have to pay for it yourself. So in general, it's recommended you don't go massively in debt to get a PhD unless there are good job prospects for it. And your likelihood of getting a job, of course, depends on what type of school you go to and what you get the degree in. So a 2015 study by David Collender and Daisy Zhu, it's Z-H-U-O, looks like a Chinese name, Zhu, because I know Zhao is, yeah. Zhu. Yeah. So they tracked PhD placements from 2008 to 2011. They found that having graduated from a top 6 English program both dramatically improved the odds of getting a job and the quality of it. So about 55% of graduates from the top 6 programs who go in academia get tenure-track jobs at a university or 4-year college. Students from Tier 4 programs basically have no chance of anything other than a Tier 4 college or a lower-ranked liberal arts college. So sometimes they work as adjuncts as well. So if you graduate from a top 6, you're very likely to, of course, get a better job, tenure-track professorship. Lower, you're going to struggle a bit. So Colliner and Zhu said that at most we need about half of the English departments we currently have. And of course, given the elite bias in academia, that would probably mean the lower level ones get eliminated first, because again, it's like you're not going to eliminate the good programs, you're going to eliminate the weaker ones. And some humanities and social sciences students pursue doctorates knowing that it will result in debt in a weak job market. It's estimated that about a fifth of the students pursuing these degrees are gaining their degrees as a consumption good. So about a fifth of the people they anticipate, they're not actively looking for a job in academia. It's more, oh, I just want to have a letter next to my name, or it's a family thing or something like that. All right, that's it for students. Any comments or thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I think it's again just it's reiterating how. I was thinking it's a question I asked before with undergraduate, and I think I think I expect it to be higher when you come to postgraduate or to PhDs, but not too much higher. Clearly, not high enough. Of how well do you know what you're actually going to be studying before you picked your major? That's one thing I asked in the last. I think it was the last part, but the part before that. What did the school actually tell you? It was in the general education what we were talking about. Did they tell you which courses you're going to take before you picked your major, before you even picked the school that you're going to? And then again, when it comes to the PhDs, how many, I think PhD, they do this more where you kind of have more of an organization where they tell you what exactly you're going to be studying, how you're going to be studying it.
Yeah.
That is normally known in a more practical sense, but then how much study has actually been done by the people who are taking those PhDs on the market after, like, what will I actually be able to apply this PhD as? And I think very many people are not as, they're not as rigorous in researching that. And I think certain PhDs, social sciences, non-STEM PhDs, you'll find a high percentage of those people going to government work, going to state work, going to public sector work with NGOs and things like this. And with that NGO term, that's non-governmental organization, yeah. There's a lot of NGOs in Africa, a lot of NGOs here in Kenya. And it's essentially, I think if you checked and you see the NGOs, it's more, I think there's a higher percentage of NGO work that is directly related with the public sector, with the governments. So that's another one of those kind of double speak terms. It's like, oh, the NGO, it's pretty much organizations that governments can use to do things that the governments are supposed to be doing and pretend that it's not to do with the government. So they don't have to spend so much money on it. They don't have to be that direct on it. If it fails, they can say, oh, yeah, it wasn't us failing. That was the NGO failing, or they can test out new things. There's a lot of NGOs here in Africa, from international NGOs and things like that, that you'll see a lot of that if that's a field that someone is unfamiliar with. And last thing I checked for the name, Zhu, and I see here it says it's Mandarin, is the ZHOU or Chow. So I think it says in Hong Kong Chinese it says Chow Chow. In Macau it's Chow CHAO, and then in Korean the Korean version now is Ju. But then Chow, it's also Chow in Vietnamese. So I think it said more like Chow rather than the Jew, because I think the Jew we're thinking about, the Jew we're thinking about. When you say the current emperor or president, emperor, whatever his name is, of China, or whatever his position, his name is Xi Jinping, right? Xi. So for that XI is a G sound. So I think the Z might be a ch sound rather than a G.
I'll ask my lipstick. I'll ask my lipstick lesbian. She speaks fluent Mandarin, so see what she says.
Yeah. Now we can employ her. She can make some use out of what she learned. We can find some Chinese major to teach us about this.
So anyway, one thing I was going to say, what you just said about the NGOs, it kind of reminds me of that whole thing about donations versus PACs. So like when Biden said like, oh, my average donation was $21, but that's donations to him directly. But then the question is how much goes into PACs and how much money comes out of those. So that's they do that sneaky thing where it's like, they can say officially, I'm not getting this much money, but it's just the donors send it to the PACs and then they take money out of the PACs. So it's sort of a similar thing, I think, with the NGOs, where it's like, okay, officially this is a non-government thing, but in reality it is.
Yeah.
And we'll probably talk more about this in the next few sections, especially the last one, but it was also the issue of credential inflation. And that's one argument I've been making for a while, because some people have said like, oh, you need a master's to stand out now because more and more people have bachelors. But then the question becomes, if that's the case, what happens after that? Does everyone get a PhD? And it's like, again, the whole purpose of a PhD is deep specialization in a certain area. It's not this qualifies you to be a good worker somehow. So I think that's where people need to start asking, like, how much farther can this keep going? And plus, as we've said before, the government already has you 12 years. So how much time are you already spending? It's like, should you spend, 20 something, 30 years before you start working. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So when somebody says, so you need that to get into that job, you need that in the PhD. And some of these people, a few of these people are the ones who talk about how the 99%, we are the 99%, we are the people who are downtrodden, we're the underemployed people, we need help, the government needs to do this, and we need these programs. Well, only 2%, almost 2% of Americans have doctoral degrees.
Yeah.
And 1.5% have earned a professional degree that requires study beyond 4 years bachelor course. So these are 1%ers, or at most 2%ers. So they're trying to talk about how they're one of the people. We're just people out there. It's like, no, you are not. You are not the resistance. You are not some sort of minority. You are a minority in some sense, but you're not some beleaguered group. You are privileged. You are in a position where you are the 1% demanding the 99% pay you for your services. That is, you are the people, in those cases, you are the people you're railing against. Just realize that. Just look at that and realize that.
All right, so the next section here is on the faculty. One of the incentives they argue is the legacy component. That is who they've taught. So, for example, I always think of Thomas Sowell actually went to Columbia to study under George Stigler, but then Stigler left and went to Chicago, and Sowell followed him there. So Sowell did his master's at Columbia, his PhD at Chicago, and Stigler later in life could have said, oh, Thomas Sowell was one of my doctoral students. Same thing with Milton Friedman. And Thomas Kuhn argued that as much intellectual change from about as much as getting it comes from getting your students jobs as much as it does winning arguments. So they like that idea of, okay, if I train this doctoral student who went on to do something, they can say, hey, look, I trained this person, and that's good for their ego, good for their legacy. So, of course, it's not possible to get all students jobs, especially when a student comes from a lower ranking school. So the best jobs still go to graduates of elite programs, and even that varies field to field. So I didn't know this, but I found out recently that Rutgers philosophy department is actually considered better than the Ivy Leagues. So, but it's interesting because Rutgers itself, they talked about becoming an Ivy League, but I think they'd have to forego public funding, and they didn't want to do that, or at least forego some form of public funding. And they basically said, like, no, we want to keep our tuition at this level so this many people can go here. So they sort of made that decision. But apparently their philosophy program is considered one of the best. And let's assume that faculty want the best for their students. They still have incentives to inflate the number of PhD students. So for one, teaching PhD students is often less tedious and more fun than teaching undergrads. So in PhD programs, you think about it, you draw people who specifically want to study that subject, and sometimes they want to study under that person. So for someone like Stigler, he had someone like Sowell who really wanted to learn from him. Whereas like if you teach economics 101, you're going to have students who just sort of sleep, BS their way through the class just to get the degree. Whereas there's people actually seek it out because they want to be there. And it also means less work, as teaching PhDs means fewer papers to grade, better quality work. So, you don't have students that you have to lecture about why they're doing poorly, because if you even get into that level of academia, you're going to be very good. And the better class experience. And again, the professors get to focus on their niche subject with people who just want to learn about that, instead of, okay, I have to teach a bunch of general stuff only because I can't find a job in my preferred field. And faculty also get students to use as research assistants. When Jason was at Brown, he taught a 200-person survey class, but PhD students did all the grading. Now, he actually chose to grade 10 papers per assignment just to see how the students were doing and make sure they were doing it thoroughly. He didn't have to, but he thought, as a gesture and also to make sure the quality was there. So it frees the professor to focus on things they want to do, more research, and then, of course, that could lead to book deals, prestige, promotions, things we've talked about. And of course, the positions themselves carry with them more prestige, money, all that. If you're a PhD instructor, you're considered one of the best. Whereas if you teach general studies, it's you're sort of a leftover, I guess. And a lot more prestige also means you can get better funding, you can hire a larger staff, and then of course, because of those things, that makes it easier to do your research, and then you can have more contributions. And the doctoral programs in general just carry higher social status, lighter course loads, and they more appeal to other universities as well. So that's it for the faculty. Any comments or anything?
Yeah, and that's just something, as we're talking about also with this whole system, we're not just focusing on, the kids are not being done well. Not just focusing like, the administration is these greedy people who are useless. Why do we have a 200% growth in administration, but the teacher to student ratio is the same or less? We're not decrying just that, but it's all sections. Like here, it's with the teachers. I have experience being a part-time lecturer at a university in Kenya. Developed a course. I put in the time to figure out the coursework and do the studies. Do the tests, make the actual like documents, go in and try to teach, and then you in class. And I asked the students, okay, why are you in this class? And we were like, oh, we just need some. You have somebody who's in there who just needed to fill in an art credit, and then you have somebody else who's watched animation since they were 5, and they just really want to get into it. You're not going to be able. Chances of you being able to teach both of those people at the same level is very difficult. And with that one, I can definitely relate to that struggle. And also being a student where some courses I was being told like, oh, when I was learning my graphic design undergrad, and I was like, okay, this web design class, I just was, why am I just making up this website? Versus when I got to the 300 level, 400 level courses, the final graphic design 3 course, we'd actually go and talk to actual businesses and design things that they were using. And then for that one, I'm like, okay, now I can see the practical nature of it. Your approach of it is a lot different at that point. So that's something that I think with the current educational system, as I asked with people, how much have you actually learned and looked into the actual curriculum that you've been learning? Even for that one, I think the current system, there should be better ways to select for students. That's the same way for PhDs. When you get to that point, people normally go and pick things they're very interested in and are a lot more dedicated to. I think you can still do that even down to middle school, down through high school, middle school, high school, undergrad level. There's definitely better ways you can, I think, select for kids to find what they do. And one of the things that I mentioned before was, why do people go directly into college right after high school? Why do people go directly into high school right after middle school? Why isn't there 6 months off, a year off for people to test different things and absorb that information that they have and learn different ways of doing things? Because one thing that does change is PhD is normally, I think, half of the people, at least half of the people, maybe I'll check this, but I think I would say at least half of the people who get PhDs don't do it right out of college. They normally take some time and then they come back in and do it. So I think with that one, it's more of a thing where it's selected in a more responsible way.
Well, I was going to sort of add on to your point here. I mean, what you said about what students want to do, I sort of saw this when I was in high school, because I went to, for those who don't know, I went to a vocational school. It's called BOCES. It's an acronym, and that's where I did culinary arts. And I basically had to take a bus. Like, I left my main school during the day and I went there, but it was nice because, I mean, I met kids from other schools, some of which I'm still sort of friendly with. I got to cook, all that. And it's for me, it was a much healthier environment because in general, it's like, it's more people who want to be there. So it's like kids who go there, they want to learn cooking. Kids who go there, they want to learn. There was like there were auto body classes. There was, I think, auto mechanics. There was carpentry, all that. And again, people kind of look their nose down on the trades. We'll probably talk about this towards the end, but it's like, one, those jobs pay well, and two, it's like, it was a better environment because, again, people actually want to be there. Like, oh, I want to cook, I want to learn about carpentry, all that, versus, okay, I'm taking a bunch of classes that I have no interest in and I'm never going to use. And then with this, there was also the option to drop out as well. So there were a few people who dropped out of these classes, but then it's like, that's better because then the people who don't want to be there leave, and then it's just people who do want to be there, and that's a better environment.
Yeah. I think that's definitely one thing where there's a lot more choice when it comes to the PhDs, and often, in many cases, there's very few cases I think you'd find where the lack of choice is actually a positive thing. You know, freedom of choice it's almost always the better option versus not having a choice in what you're going to be able to do.
Right. All right. So moving on here, next session, it's administrators. So the administrators have a stake in more PhDs because, for one, it means more prestige for their universities and for them personally. So administrators can say, oh, we started these PhD programs. That makes them look better. It also gives the impression that the university is more sophisticated. This could justify higher pay for individual administrators, larger budgets for departments, and more funding in general. And it also justifies higher tuition, more grant opportunities, and larger shares of state appropriations. So they can say, oh, we need more funding because we have these PhD programs now. So as discussed previously, colleges sometimes eliminate programs, but that's only if they're really underperforming. So looking at their incentive structure, it makes more sense to expand. Like the ones I cited above were on average 20 students a year. So that means some were less than that. So if you have a department that does 10 or 15 people, why is it there? It's like, why are you spending that space, time, money, energy, all that. And remember this too: private firms are profit maximizers, bureaucracies are budget maximizers. High-level administrators have an incentive to increase spending. If a dean wants to become president somewhere else, they can cite that they raised more money for their college. So for what it's worth, Harvard has a $38 billion endowment and still gets private donations on top of that. Like, there was a thing I heard a few years ago about, they said, what is it, like Harvard could give free tuition to students for like the next several decades and they'd be fine. Like, they're rolling in that much money. And there are various other arrangements, such as allowing students who struggle in PhD programs, they'll let them graduate with a master's degree, just call it good after that. So university administrators essentially oversupply their services. So there are various reasons for doing so. Again, they want more funding, they want more job security as well, which helps if you're a gatekeeper. So you can say, hey, I got these new programs started, I secured all this funding, I'm going to continue to do this if you keep me here. And that sort of gives them a safe place to stay. And university administration appears to be a prime source of bureaucratic accretion or the expansion of administrative personnel relative to the tasks they perform. Several studies found that administrators may do things like expand enrollment to bring in more revenue. If a third or a fourth rate school with lower requirements, they'll just take on more students. That way they get more money that way. If it's an elite school, they may maintain the number of students but raise the tuition. So either way, they find a way to bring in more money. It's either, oh, Harvard is going to be just as, maybe even more selective, but we're going to charge more money to go there. Or if it's a lower school, we'll just take on more people. And that's happened with my culinary school as well. Like, they say way more people went out. I know class size, they said there used to be 8 or 10 in a class. When I went, it was like 15 or a little more. Someone told me they had 20 something in a class. So you think about that, it's like they're pushing a lot more people through. And then plus tuition has gone up. Now, obviously you can argue the school has expanded. There are more things to offer. There are new dorms. There are other things. But at the same time, even with inflation factored in, tuition's still gone up. So, and you could argue it's not that administrators are intentionally saddling students with low debt and degrees that they can't find opportunities with, but the way the incentives are, they're kind of incentivized to do that by default. Sure. Any thoughts or comments before we move on?
No, I just looked it up when you mentioned it, for me, just for clarification, the difference between a master's and a doctorate degree. It says the focus is from franklin.edu. It says the focus of master's degrees and doctorate degrees is different. A master's degree is designed to deepen career-oriented knowledge and skills. A doctorate degree is a heavily research-based degree designed to develop critical research, analytical, and writing skills in an effort to fill industry knowledge gaps. So right. For that one, as you can see, that's why this is doing a higher level stuff. So the masters, there's going to be a lot more people with masters. Let me double check and see how many people have masters. How many have masters? And with the masters, where it's like, okay, just expanding on something, you're more capable of doing that. You're going into something. So with masters, I think you could even be studying things that particular PhDs have done, like to get into that actual wider things. And that's why you said, if somebody seems to not be able to do the PhD, they can be like, okay, you might as well get the master's after that, because you still touched these bases. You haven't broken new ground, but you're still a lot more aware and capable of it. And it says here about 13.1% have a master's professional degree or doctorate. So they say that that's counting that 2% that we talked about. The education level of American adults is on the rise as more college graduates go on to earn master's, professional, and doctorate degrees. So they have a chart here. Yeah, bachelor's degree about in 2018 says 48% compared to 2000 in the millions. This is it's not 48%, it's millions. So you're saying number of degree holders in 20, and this is from census.gov, number of degree holders in 2000, bachelor's degree was 29.8%. In 2018 is 48.2. Sorry, I keep saying percent. It's 29.8 million versus 48.2 million. And then when it comes to master's degree, it's 10.4 million to 21 million. So that one's doubled. And when it comes to professional degree, 2.6 million to 3.2 million. That hasn't doubled. When it comes to doctorate degree, it's 2 million compared to 4.5 million, and that one has more than doubled. So those are the figures for those people who want to know, who our elites are, who are social betters who vote in better patterns than us uneducated masses do. Those are the numbers that are there. But those are interesting numbers. It's gone from people talk about how garbage the United States of America is, it's the end of the world, all these things. But if I don't agree necessarily that credentialization is a way to determine, but some people count on, oh, it's education is a key thing. But if you use that as a metric, then the country is better today than it was in 2018. But since I hope you're learning from this conversation, or if you've thought about these things before, and it's not simply going through the educational system that actually means someone is more educated, there actually might be some negatives. The fact that some of these have changed to that amount, like why has the bachelor's degree not doubled, but doctorate degree has more than doubled? What is the explanation that someone would think of in there? And let me see if I can find out what professional degree is here. What is a professional degree?
Well, what you just said, it kind of reminded me of what Mike Rose said once, where he was like, the cost of college has increased 3,000 times. He meant 3,000%. I'm like, 3,000 times? Like, what would that be? But he made an error. I was like, yeah. 3,000 times. Like, geez.
I wouldn't be surprised, though. It could have in some cases. Yeah. Because it might have. Because technically, because in some of the things were still being learned without school that now you need school. Yeah. So if before you could do something as an apprentice, but now you're doing it as needing at least $3,000, then technically isn't that a $3,000? Isn't that a 3,000% increase in some way? If you want that apprenticeship to be one, I don't know.
We'll get into this in a later section, but I was looking, I think it's the last chapter where they talk about what the cost of a public university was in the 70s versus now. And they said, even if you adjust for inflation in today's dollars, I think a public university tuition used to be like $2,000 a year, and that's adjusted for inflation today's dollars. So it's like $2,000 versus, I paid $32,000, which is for culinary school is pricier, but then you have some of these other schools, 50, 60,000. It's crazy. I mean,
Yeah. So it says here, the professional degree as the professional master's degree often involves internship or field work, while the research master's degree provides experience in research and scholarship and may enter the final degree as a step towards entering into a doctoral program. So yeah, I think master's is only towards PhD, whereas professional degree I think is more the internship type of thing where you learn at probably an institution or from somebody and you get employment directly with that institution or person that you've learned under.
Right.
Likely.
So this will be second to last section here. So the ethics of PhD over production, let the students beware. So who should be held responsible when the students don't get a job due to PhD over production? Is it even a moral problem? So there's typically two answers to this. The first answer is blame the students. The courses offered don't come with promises. It's not the professor's responsibility to make sure the students get the job they want or even get a job at all. Students should do their due diligence. It's on them. The second one is blame the faculty and administrators. The programs advertise themselves as preparing students to become professors. They know that most of the students want to become professors. While students may worry about job prospects, students rarely know how good or bad their chances are. Faculty are supposed to mentor students, not just take on an apprentice who they know won't get a job. And the authors point out what's kind of interesting here is that many of their left-wing colleagues who complain about the job market, they usually answer with one. So they complain, oh, the humanities aren't underappreciated, all that. But then they say, well, it's the student's fault for not doing due diligence. And it's like, well, which is it here? I mean, it's like you're the one saying everyone should go through school. But then, hey, how come there aren't jobs available? Well, it's the student's fault. It's like you're the ones pushing for everyone to go through school. So, and one argument here, though, for one thing, is grad students are adults, not children. As you said, some people go back later. So this means taking responsibility for one's own decisions and career path. Also, these are already students that have done better and on average score higher on IQ tests, things like that. So it would make sense. Like, okay, these are not small children that are confused. These are people who spent time in school. And if they've excelled at a lower level, they should at least have some idea of what they're getting into. So, yeah. For number two, while people know that the job market is bad, the data often isn't clear or readily available, especially for that particular school. Many graduate departments do not keep, let alone publicize data about how their students will perform on the job market. They'll list students who recently found a job, but not the students who did not. And the colleges also don't mention the type of jobs they get. So they like some of those PhD graduates may get jobs as adjuncts or something, but they don't leave that. They don't mention that. They just say, oh, they got a job after graduating. But if they're making like 30,000 a year, well, I mean, that's less than I made starting off cooking. Plus I didn't have the student debt. So I didn't have that much student debt, I should say. So it's like, they don't really factor that into consideration. And to be clear, I mean, I think every college does this to a point. I mean, I saw this at CIA, I saw this elsewhere. They always hold up their best graduates, and it's like enticing people like, oh, you too could be like this person, but they don't tell you all the people who just work average jobs and never make it. You know, it's like you can hold up CIA, you can hold up Kat Cora, you can hold up Jonathan Beno. He was the executive chef at Per Se. That was Thomas Keller's place, all that. But again, it's like how many other people end up either working menial jobs or just don't make it at all. So it's like, they always hold up the highlights, but that doesn't tell the whole story.
And how many colleges actually hold up the successful dropouts?
Yeah,
like, you could drop out too and be like this person. Like, does it? I saw Harvard. Yeah. This was listed on Google, so I don't know if Harvard themselves will proudly list someone like Mark Zuckerberg as an alumni. But even as long as you attend a place and you leave, you're technically considered an alumnus. But yeah, you hardly hear somebody say, "Oh, this person dropped out after 2 years. Now they're very successful." So it's you have to think they're organisms themselves. They have their interests, and they're going to try to put on a better face than might actually be true.
Well, because I saw this too. I might have touched on this before, but the whole thing about the bachelor's program, how the CIA offers a bachelor's program as well. And of course, if you go there, they constantly tell you should do it. But then you talk to chefs in the industry, and they're like, "No, don't do it." It's like, they're like, you're coming out of school, you're a line cook, you're making a little above minimum wage, you'd have even more debt, and you're not going to use management stuff for years anyway. So again, as I mentioned before, if you want to get into like a trainee program or something, and they're like, okay, we'll help you pay for it, maybe it's worth it. But it's like, just to get it, just to have it, it's like, it's kind of a waste. And my father has actually told me about how he knows people who worked with IBM and things, they'll actually leave degrees off of their resume because they're considered overqualified, and people see them and they're like, oh, this person's going to want this much money. So there's that's sort of a strange other effect, like another effect that happens here where on the one hand, it's like there aren't jobs for the PhDs, but then on the other hand, it's like, oh, this person is going to want all this money. We'd rather have someone out of college who's going to settle for less, and we can train them. Maybe they'll work their way up and all that. So that's kind of a strange dynamic as well. And he told me at one point he was thinking about getting a PhD, and he's like, it would have looked good, doctorate next to my name. But in retrospect, would it have really made a huge difference? Probably not. So.
Yeah.
So let's see here.
That thing, but as you pointed out there, like with the PhDs, when you do that, it's time also. There's costs there.
Yeah.
And you're taking out these people where if we had a system that focused more on learning and the ability and being productive versus just getting the credentials, how many current people studying PhDs might be able to actually have learned this while actually working and being in the market and supporting other people, being in environments where maybe they're not just in academia in these ivory towers, but they're outside inspiring people that are in there. Maybe like we just had a thing where like the PhDs, instead of going to these ivory towers, you still have these same high schools and universities and things like that where they just have some kind of better work-life balance, as they said. That term is a bit problematic to me. Let's use it for here, where they have a situation where maybe they're working from home somewhat, then they can spend some time at the local educational facility. That's not to say it's just a high school, just a middle school, but it's just an area with laboratories, with libraries, with open areas to sit and talk. And then you have this mixed environment where some student can just be taking the year off of the year between middle school and high school, the year between high school and college, and just go to this place. And that person from the neighborhood, instead of being at an ivory tower PhD institution, can just be spending their weekends at this place studying this something in particular with a different range of people. You might come in and just help somebody make this guy who develops this new part of powering this ship that's going to go to Mars. You helped him just maybe mold something that was built on the little rover like thing that he did, and that inspires that kid to decide I care enough about this. So when I'm actually going to go to college. When I go to high school, I'm going to pick mathematics. When I actually go there, I'm finally going to be like, oh, let me focus on engineering at that point because they've had some practical examples. So that's just like off the top of my head right now, just thinking. There's other ways to do these things where I'm sure many of you listening to this have other ways that if you sat down and thought of different ways of learning, and you'd figure out that you learned certain things that are valuable to your life outside of this current system, and you'd be able to understand that, hey, there's actually possibly ways where we can improve on this system or add new things or take away certain things. Yeah.
Well, I was going to add, Brian Kaplan talks about this in his book as well. And it's funny with him because, like he says, he's an ivory tower academic. Like, I think his last private sector job when he was 18. I think he's 49 now. And he explains, he's like, but he himself has observed, he's like, there is a strange disconnect between academics and employers. And he was saying how they sort of hinge on what do academics say, but then he's like, look, I know that the academic environment is very different from typical work environments. And he even says some things like, if you have a job that involves Roman history, you have a very unusual job. Like a lot of these teachers even admit you're not going to use a lot of this stuff. And then he goes, why don't they put more emphasis on building your resume? Why don't they put more emphasis on what do you do if your field changes and you have to learn new skills? And it's interesting because, like I say, he himself has worked in academia his whole life, but he sees that disconnect as well, where it's like, oh, these are the educated people they know, but no, they're missing a lot of things as well. And there's sort of this strange transition where people spend all that time in academia, then go into the world, and then it's like, this isn't what I thought. And it's like there's got to be a better way to go about this, because it's like, again, unless you work in academia your whole life like him, you're going to have to deal with all these other things anyway. Yeah. All right, so let's see here. So what was I saying? So yeah, so students sort of seem to place faith in these departments, as we say, caveat emptor, buyer beware. And one solution could be what a department could put forth, what is their philosophy towards their graduation students, like what are the prospects, what are the jobs and all that. But again, are the departments willing to do that? Because again, these teachers, they want to keep their jobs and all that. And if we're training students for jobs that aren't there, people are going to be like, wait a minute, why should I do this? And then if their enrollment drops, then they're going to cut the program because they're like, we're not going to pay you to teach 10 people a year. It makes no sense. So again, so just to finish up, it's pretty clear why professors and administrators maintain this. And they have sort of this hypothetical in the back, the Pam versus Thad. So a teacher versus an administrator, how Pam is the teacher who really likes what she does and she likes getting paid, doesn't do that much work. She's pretty much guaranteed to have students who are good, who want to do that. So even if she has low enrollment, she's going to fight to keep her department around because she doesn't want to be out of a job. And then the administrator, same thing. They're going to fight to keep her department around because they can say, oh, look, we have this many PhD programs. We're turning out this many PhDs. We need this much funding. If their departments shrink, their funding could be cut. So again, given the current systems, the incentives, all the stuff I've been talking about, it makes sense why it is the way it is. But would it change? Would this change course? I mean, I think it should, but politically, will it? It's kind of hard to say. So
yeah,
that's all I have. Anything else?
No, it's just to reiterate again, it's the incentives. We're not saying it is negative that somebody wants to keep their job. Yeah. We're not saying it's negative that somebody wants higher pay. We're just saying there might be ways to create the incentives in order to keep your job and gain higher pay, be more tied into how well you are at educating the students to be more productive as possible in their own spheres. There's a way to do that where it's a win-win situation where we work together and we coexist and we have this social construct of civilization where we realize it is better for us to actually cohabitate and work together and cooperate versus have these antagonistic needs and wants. There's possible ways for all of us to, in general, be better off than we would be if we weren't together, and for sure to be better off than we would be if we were fighting over a certain thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to add too, Kaplan cites heavily the work of Michael Spence, who was an economist who won a Nobel Prize, and what his work had to do with how much of a degree is signaling versus how much of it is the human capital thing. We talked about that in a previous chapter. There are people who say we need more people in college because it's the human capital. We're training people to be better workers and all that. And then the other side of that is, no, it's signaling. It's, okay, someone graduates top from their class at Harvard, you're going to assume that's a smart person. I was thinking recently, my great-grandfather, he finished his last year at Georgetown and his first year of law school at the same time. So people hear that and think, wow, he must have been a very smart guy, which he obviously was. But it's the same sort of thing. It's that signaling. Now, the human capital thing is not irrelevant either. I mean, Kaplan even points out, he's like, yeah, I had to learn statistics. You have to learn the different economic schools of thought. Like, it's not you don't learn valuable things, but the question is how much is human capital, how much of it is signaling, and given how much on the job training there is and all that, it seems to be based on what Spence and others have found, it's a lot more signaling than it is actually the human capital. Like you're seeking it, you're using it to identify more qualified people who often do become better workers. But it's like, it's not okay if we push everyone through these schools, they'll all be like that. It's the selection versus treatment effect, as we talked about.
Yeah. And that's another key thing. It's why we're doing these, and this does go into, we are human beings, we are living creatures, we do reproduce, and I think all these things are structured into reproductive fitness in some way. When you take that out of it, when you take the fact that we are living beings that are genetically driven to reproduce, and everything we build is kind of built on that foundation. So even the schools themselves, the organisms that are schools, will try to reproduce the environment and situations that are more beneficial for that organism of the institution that is a school to continue and perpetuate itself. So once you start something, it's good to keep going. And that's something to keep in mind. And then also when you're talking about the incentives of the people doing certain things, there's some people who enter certain fields for different reasons. Somebody might enter because they want to get to the moon. Somebody might enter a certain field because they want to improve, to get enough money to impress enough kind of women. And this is something I think I was going to mention this in the last conversation we had, but it broke off and didn't actually get to the main point of it. We were talking about the discrepancy between like men and women, and talking about the human resources, and we're talking about the human capital. And we're talking about how, men are successful, humans in general are more successful than other animals because of our ability to use tools. And now there's many kinds of tools. If you're very capable at using a computer, you're probably going to be more able to achieve a lot more than if you can just use a screwdriver in the common day and age, because a computer is a much more diverse and capable tool in most cases, in general, and some place. But like if there's no electricity, the computer is worthless, but the screwdriver might be awesome. So anyway, you're just like invest in a situation where you have as many resources as possible and energy and things, the computer might be more useful. But then I was also thinking when it talks about men and women, saying, men achieve more in these kind of fields and do these kind of things. But on the inverse, women have a lot more influence over men than I think it is. There's a different kinds of influence that men have over the trends that women do. And that's why you hear a lot in the gender studies, people talking about, the male's beauty standards are why women are acting this way, because women are trying to impress men, but men are also trying to impress women, and women have that kind of control. And I think if you look at it in that sense, women actually are able to control the most useful tool in existence, which is the human male, in the sense of a human resource. So there is that aspect, but then now further, since both of that is to create kids, once they've had the kids, technically babies, will be the most useful at using both the female and the male. Like when you look at a situation where, like a Donald Trump and the Melania Trump situation, they've both achieved a lot in their life, very powerful people. But in large part, I would say part of him running was his kids, especially Barron. So those kids with the least capable ability might have the most control. So that's tangent carrying on from the last conversation, but yeah. So it's just
I was gonna sort of add to that. Like this feminist I used to know, when I told her about MGTOW, she kind of laughed and she's like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "Men going their own way." She's like, what do they mean going their way? It's their world. I'm going my own way. But then you think about it, if they see everything through the lens of patriarchy runs everything, to them, it's like the king saying, I'm going to take today off. It's like, well, you're in charge. You can. But they see it through that lens. So in their perspective, it's like, why would you do it? But then when you get into things like this, it's like, okay, do I want a relationship? Do I want to have kids? How much would this cost? If I do have a relationship, am I going to get married? Divorce? Like there is a lot more. But again, if you see it strictly through that lens, it's the same. It's the same thing with most of these Marxist-born ideologies. If you just see everything through that lens of these are the oppressed, these are the oppressor, you have this very oversimplified view, which doesn't factor in all these other details. Like you want to say rich people are this, rich people are that. Well, did the person come from money? Did the person work their way up? Did the person make their money in the market? Was it through government? Was it a combination? Like there are a lot more factors than just these simplistic power dynamics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That thing with the feminism, the MGTOW, like there is something I saw that, like, I think some people say, MGTOW is this male feminism. Not quite. I wouldn't say that. And we talked about that in the critical theory conversation about the feminisms, how there's different kinds of feminisms. So there might be a particular school of feminism that might be similar to MGTOW, but a lot of feminism is very dependent on defining the female via their stance with a male or in some kind of competition. Whereas MGTOW, from what I've seen, that's one school of thought that I followed from with early inceptions of it, and some of the most active speakers like the Barbarossas, the Stardust. It's an online based type of thing where there's a lot of speakers who came up with that, who started talking about the terms, and they're more monkish type of people. Versus, I think the equivalent of the character of the feminist would be something like a PUA, a pickup artist who says who at one point they say women are garbage, but in the same way, the type of methods they treat women kind of selects for garbage women, or it devalues them in a sense where it's like, if you need to go to talk to 100 women in order to get the 2 women who will fall for your pickup line, and then pick the one of the 2 that seems that will be more likely to sleep with you on that first night, and that's what you're actually proud about, then you're meeting crap women. It's not women in general. It's not females in general. It's like you are putting an effort to find the worst kind of women and then judging the other 98 or 99 based on that one. Like that's not the way to do things. And that's a similar thing that I think some people on the feminist side do. Will go in and antagonize men or find the worst examples of them and try to say that's what the rest of the group is. And these are not positive things to do in either way.
Well, a recurring theme that I've noticed, and I talked to that woman who I'm sort of friends with, who was more radical, then she calmed down when she got married and had a baby boy. And one of the things that she actually agreed with me on is that when you see the more attractive feminist, the reason for that is usually that they're the kind of women who are good looking, but they sort of get manipulated by nasty guys. And then they date guys who treat them terribly. And then they're friends with girls who do the same thing. So they all talk among themselves and they just conclude based on that men are bad. But oftentimes they're not willing to examine. It's like, okay, you chose to date these guys, and why did you gravitate towards them in the first place? And it's like, it's not fair to hold up those guys, because again, it's like, I can look back and say like, oh, I shouldn't have been interested in certain women or dated certain women. And if this didn't work out, here's why. But it's like, I'm capable of saying that. But if you're just going to say, oh, all men are like this, no, you keep gravitating towards those types. And you have to be willing to sort of say, why do I keep gravitating towards these types? Or else it's like, you're just going to keep ending. It's going to be the same. And it's just going to be, oh, it's men. And
This is a side joke. I don't think my cousin made this up. My cousin posted this some time back. He said, for all the women who say all men are pig, who told you to try all of them?
Yeah.
If you've tried so many, you think they're pigs, that could be something with your selection process, where it's like all majors are worthless. It's like, no, who told you to take all these majors? Maybe some things are better and some things are worse. So it's kind of that kind of environment.
Well, the example I like to make too is like, it's like the person who says my friends are losers. It's like, well, why are you hanging out with them? I don't hang out with or talk to people that I think are losers. It's like that's a reflection on you if you're doing that. It's either you too are a loser or you're insecure and you hang around people that make you feel better about yourself. It's like, I would rather hang around smarter, successful people that I learned from and they contribute to my life. Of course, Silas, these conversations have been good. I've been learning and hopefully providing value as well. But those are the friends I want. I don't want people that it's like, oh, I feel so much smarter than this person, I feel superior. No, that's not what I want.
And part of this could be that system that we have, the K through 12, the compulsory schooling, where it's like, okay, you happen to be born in this area, so these are the kids you're going to have to build your bonds with. These are the kids you're going to have relations with. Like, oh, this kid literally lives across the border. I've known this kid for the first 5 years of my life because our parents work at the same place. But because they're over this imaginary line, they have to go to a school hundreds of 10 miles or 15 miles away in that other direction. I have to go to one 15 miles away in this other direction. And then at that point, now those are the kids that I have to build interactions with instead of this kid who's been right across because of these random borders that we're going to set in this compulsory schooling system. So there are those factors that come into that. And then that starts when those K through 12 kids are brought into the universities and they feel you have to learn this, you have to major in this. Oh, you've picked this major, this is what you have to pick. You have to go through it all the way through, and you're definitely going to be able to find something. Oh, this is uncomfortable for you. No, you're supposed to graduate by this amount of time. You're not allowed to just drop out or find something else. This is what you have to do. And then that just gets people into that whole mentality where it's less of what you want to do and what you can do, more than what you have to do and what you should do. So those are the kind of things that I think might be limiting the way people actually interact when you actually leave the world. There are some similarities. I just released a video talking about how Black women voters, which is not necessarily every Black woman, every Black female in the United States of America, but the Black females, the people who identify as Black and female that choose to vote are a specific group of people, and they happen to vote in one particular way. It was 99% voted for Hillary Clinton in the previous election. Let's see what happens at this time with Donald Trump. So that's a select group. What else about those groups actually behaves in a certain way? And that's why when you see, oh, people with these kinds of degrees vote in this certain way. So what else is it also about these particular group of people, non-STEM degree females? I think that might be one group where you find their voting patterns might be as close to the voting patterns of Black female voters, where it might be 99% to Hillary Clinton if you actually looked at like gender studies. Probably, definitely, I think if you looked at the gender studies PhD degree people, the percentage of them that voted for Hillary, that decided to vote, I think you'd find it would be, if there are even 100 of them, they're probably not even 100 of them, are they?
So, probably not.
We're like let's say gender studies undergrad. I think you'd find, if you found maybe 1,000 of them, you'd probably find that decided to vote, then you'd probably find like, I think 900 at least would have been voting for Hillary Clinton in just estimation, yeah.
And that's always what comes up too about the silent majority and all that. And like Tim Pool has talked about that, and as have a few other people, that like there are all these people who have said like, oh, I'm supporting Trump, but don't say anything. If people find out, I'm going to lose all my endorsements. And it's like, you do also wonder how many of that, because it's like there are some people who are very outspoken like us, but then there's other people, you have no idea what they're actually going to do. They may be putting on a facade, and then once they're in the booth, do something else. So it's like, but then it's like, okay, they're kind of concerned, like, is this going to affect my career? So they're keeping their mouths shut. But then it's like, in private, what do they think? So, yeah. All right. I think that's all I have. Did you have anything else?
Oh, that was it? Okay.
Yeah,
so
that's
the end of it. I think we finished up.
Yep.
And tonight is election night, as we mentioned. I'm sure I'll still be talking to you later tonight, Stephen.
Yep.
And for those of you out there, this is going to be posted long after the election has come out. And I think my prediction is Donald Trump is going to win. If he would be declared the winner by the time this is posted, that might still be up in the air due to some of the problematic things that some people might think will happen. But the United States of America is the United States of America. These issues with the schools are still going to be there, no matter who is president or not. I think people will still want to learn things. I think my general take with this, with the world in general, but focusing on the election, is that the country is the way it is when we're recording this, is the same way it's going to be whenever this is uploaded. And this will be before the election and after the election. You might know something different. You might have different things confirmed about it and look at things differently, but it's still the same people. It's still the same United States of America. You're technically still the same your friends, your family. That's still there. So that's something to focus on, where you might as well learn more and be more sure and confirmed about the way things actually are, because they are that way, whether or not you know that, if that makes sense. I think finding out what things are is getting educated, and I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Anything else?
That's all I have.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
That's perfect.